Okay. Aye. Finally. Okay.
I don't know how to close the door. Okay.
So, what dreams did you have as a young person?
What was I thinking of? What was I thinking of when I was a young person?
Yeah, or like, what did you have any
Goals in life?
yes, like
Yeah, well, I wanted to, I wanted to finish school, high school, and I wanted to go into service, and I wanted to go to college.
and why did you go into the service? Wait, you went into the Navy, right?
I went into the Navy in 1943.
And why did you go to the Navy?
I went into the Navy because I figured that was the best branch of service for me at that time.
Okay. And what made that the best?
Well, I figured it was the safest because most of the people that went into the Army and the Air Corps, especially the Army, there were a lot of fatalities, people getting shot and so forth. And I figured that the Navy was safer because I'd be on the water.
So, did you volunteer before getting drafted?
Yes, I volunteered for the Navy. I went to Chicago, Great Lakes, Illinois in 1943. And that's where I was inducted into the Navy.
And what was life on the ship like?
What was it like?
Yes.
Well, in 1943 is a long time ago, and basically, when you go in for induction, you're like in boot camp, and you're not really in the Navy. You're just like a kindergartner. You're getting ready to go into the Navy. But I went into boot camp at Great Lakes, Illinois, in 1943. Okay, and then after a period of about 4 or 5 months, I went to Hampton Institute. That's down in Virginia. I was sent there for further training. They determined that I had the ability to move up in my ranking. So I went from a boot camp, Stripe 1, to a boot camp, to a Hampton Institute trainee in diesel mechanics, and earned my second stripe.
And what is a second stripe?
My second stripe, it's a stripe. It indicates how many years you're ranked, just like sergeant in the Army. If he has 1 stripe there, he's first class. If he has 2, he's second class, and 3, third class, and so forth. Mm-hmm.
So, how would you? What is what part of being in the Navy resonates with you the most?
What part of the Navy that I like best? Well, I like the part where I was advancing and getting some authority. I was 20 years old. Well, actually, I was at that time. I was 17 years old, and then when I obtained my second stripe, I was like 18 years old, and like I said, I went to Hampton Institute, and I got trained in diesel engineer, and I got my second stripe. After I got my second stripe, they sent me to Pensacola, Florida. Pensacola, Florida, which is a training base for pilots. And by my having a my having a second stripe and only being like 19 years old, a baby really, I was in charge of a flotilla of boats and men in Pensacola at that young age with two stripes. And being Afro-American, and we were segregated at that period of time, that was quite an achievement because most Afro-American sailors, people in the Navy who were achieving, were cooks and bakers. And I was not a cook or a baker, okay? But at that time they did have the 99th Pursuit Squadron black pilots from Tuskegee at that time. But I was in charge at this young age of approximately 120 men. Yeah, that proud. And then from there, but at that time we had to go into town, and they had a sort of a recreation period that you could be exposed to at the end of the week. They're called USO, United Service Organization, and they would have drinks and people that would come in, and especially girls, and we would have festivities. But our travel arrangements were such that we had to ride in what we call boxcars because it was a segregated period, and we couldn't ride on the regular facilities. So we had to ride in these boxcars like you see on railroads now. This is what they made us ride in. But basically, being young and youthful, I was able to survive.
So, when you mentioned segregation, what was different in terms of race relations at that time compared to nowadays?
Well, 50 years later, and a lot of things haven't changed, but it was pretty bad then. Okay, you couldn't eat in some restaurants. You couldn't ride on some transportation facilities, like I said, like it's streetcars, and it was pretty intense. It was pretty intense, and like I said, 50 years later, or 60 years later, things haven't changed that much. We still have segregation, but it was very, very, very intense at that time. So hopefully it'll get better.
Do you think white people generally have stayed the same, or do you think they've improved on how?
Have they moved?
Wait,
Have they moved? Have they improved?
yes. Do you think?
Well, some facets of life there have been improvements. We have more black professionals. We have more black teachers. We have reporters. We have TV analysts that are now native Afro-Americans. So, there's been some achievement. We had a president who was black, if you remember. So, we can say that there have been some improvements, but there's room for a lot of other improvements.
Do you think that that black people face racism because we're feared, or
Because of what?
because we're feared? Like, why do you think racism?
Why do
exists?
we have
Yeah.
racism?
Why do you think?
It's well, we have racism basically because it's a power struggle economically. It's about survival of the fittest of survival, and not only in the United States, you have racism all over the world, in many countries. You have racism in England and racism in Canada. You have racism even in Africa. So it's about power and wealth and structure and being able to enforce and create laws and rules and regulations that benefit your race.
Okay. So when Donald Trump was elected president, do you think that made the country go backwards, or how do you think that, or do you think, what do you think the effect?
Well, in my opinion, it's a little too early to tell. However, there are indications that there are some limitations on his ability to rule, to be analytical, and to be decisive, and to be able to get along even with his own cabinet. So we'll just have to wait and see as time goes by what the final outcome is going to be.
So when World okay when World War II ended, what was that like for you? Like how? Like, well, do you remember the day you got the news, or do you remember? What do you remember about
The news for what?
World War II ending?
For who?
World War II ending?
Oh. Well, I was actually in the Philippines at that time, and actually we're getting ready to invade Japan, and they dropped a bomb. And when they dropped the bomb, of course, that eliminated the annihilation, the loss of life of millions of soldiers, because Japan was determined at that time that they were going to fight to the death of all their patients, all their inhabitants, to preserve their power structure. So I was very glad. I was very glad. But then I was coming home.
And okay. So, did when you came home, was how difficult or easy was it to readjust to living?
Well, it wasn't very difficult for me because I was 21 years old when I got out of service, and went straight to Ohio State University and enrolled. And like I said, I was a freshman in 1950, and I'm 46. I'm sorry, but after 4 years of exposure, I got my undergraduate degree, and I came out in 1950, and I went to work for the government. They have a depot, Columbus. This is in Columbus, Ohio. Columbus General Depot, and that's where they process parts for the Army. They put a coating on them called plastic coat, and this plastic coat is a preservative to keep the the particles from becoming moist and wet and rusting. And so I worked there for 3 years to make some more money. I run out of money. I was under the GI Bill, and I came out. I left there in '53.
You left there in '53.
Yeah, I worked in at the depot from 1950 to 1953, and I came out of the depot, and I went to into dental school in 1953. And while I was there, of course, I worked at the post office to augment tuition because the Bill of Rights, the money that the government paid would only be it ran out after 4 years. So I had to use my 4 years. So I had to have money to continue my education, which I wanted to do. And so I applied at the post office, and I got a job carrying mail. Got a job carrying mail. I worked at night, not carrying the mail, but I'd be sorting the mail. I was a mail sorter. And I would work all night and come back. I had living quarters at Ohio State, Baker Hall, on campus. I was one of the first blacks, Americans, to have quarters on campus. And this was in 1953, okay? And I worked, and I went to school, and I applied. I went to dental school, and I graduated in 1957.
Wow, that was the year Leslie was born, or your daughter was born.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course I got married. And I had a daughter when I graduated, Leslie, and happened to be your mother, and your grandmother, and your mother was her child and was my child, okay? So I had Leslie in '53. She was born in '53 when I graduated. And my wife was in the Air Force, and she was captain in the Air Corps as a nurse. And so we embarked on our career in 1953. Okay, and in 1957, I opened up my practice, and by then, a couple of years later, my son was born. Okay, so I've been practicing since 1957. Okay, I've been practicing dentistry since 1957, and I've witnessed a lot of turmoil, assassinations of presidents, and like you asked me, did I think things are better? They could be better. But they're better than they were when I first went into service. So that's about it. That should cover that for you.
Mind if I ask you? I'd like to ask you about family life.
About my family life?
Yeah, like what's being a father, like stuff, being a husband.
It has its ups and downs, You have trials and tribulations. There's nothing like having a family, A family is the greatest possession that you can have. It's more precious than money. It's more precious than gold. To have a family, a good family, There are families that are not very, very good, as we want to categorize them, but